Well, good evening. I'm really glad to be here. I'm very excited to be here to share some of this handicraft history with you, and I'm really glad to see that you are here. I wanted to start off with telling you a little bit about myself, besides being Brian's mother, that I've been very glad to do for 26 years, most of the time. I'm actually a transplant to this area. My parents grew up in, my mother grew up in western Kansas, out on the plains, on the prairie, and my father grew up in eastern Kansas. And so when I came here, my dad came here because of engineering, and he came to work for General Motors. So I came here at a young age, and I was not aware of how my background from being from that area of the world would influence me for the rest of my life. And I didn't become aware of some of the things, some of those threads, as it were, until I started recently becoming very much involved in the world of fiber arts. So what happened is that I actually grew up pretty much getting a sewing needle in my hand and learning how to thread a needle and be around thread and sew. I was hand sewing before I could read, okay? Especially my mother, who was on the Great Plains, she grew up with kerosene, a path, pumping water, and cooking on a wood stove. There wasn't a Rural Electrification Act that had gotten to them yet, and so it was a natural part of our lives that the traditional sewing and other crafts would be learned. And I was interested in learning them because I was seeing it. My mom loved to sew. I learned how to knit probably when I was 6 or 7. My grandmother was from a German lineage, and she knit, and so she always made house slippers to keep your feet warm, and I wanted to know how to do that. So she taught me how, and I made my first house slippers. To give you an idea of how my skills were compared to my sewing, at the same age of 7, I had made my first dress. Okay, and I was using a sewing machine by that time, and so it was not my first craft. My dad's mother was a quilter and also very much into crochet. She made doilies and antimacassars and things of that sort with very fine thread and a very small crochet hook. And she, as it was in those days, she looked down on the knitters. Now the knitters kind of look at crochet and go, crochet. So things in the world change. Now, if you're not aware, there's been a huge resurgence in the interest in knitting in particular over the last probably about 12 years or so. And I can't document this, but I'm pretty sure that it had to do with the big change that we all experienced as a result of terrorism coming to America. And one of the books that I've read about was an account of people leaving downtown Manhattan, crossing over the bridges, being covered with dust, shaking it off, and going into a knitting store, and one particular knitting store in Brooklyn, and had quite a few people that they didn't even know what they were doing there, but they plopped down, they picked up some yarn, and wanted to know how to do this, and they just found comfort in doing that. And so that comes to why I love some of the traditional crafts. Not only are they, part of my experience, I had not been very involved in any of them from the time, about 26 years ago. Something in that. I also have a 22-year-old daughter. So when I had kids, I was not doing as much in terms of needlework. I did some embroidery. I've done all kinds of things. I haven't done any tatting, but I've done a lot of sampling and dabbling in the various needle arts. But around the time of having children, by the time I got to that point of the day, I wasn't too interested. And although I did have some waiting room time with Brian, and I used that. And then I became involved in pottery, so then I was very much involved in handicrafts, but not this. And about 5 years ago in our family, my husband's from a large Irish Catholic family, and his family we're over 100 people now in 2 generations, and there were 5 babies born, including the firstborn of my godson. And I decided that I talked to a friend of mine who knit, and I said, I think I would like to make him something special for that baby. So she talked me into knitting it was a sweater, a toddler sweater, because babies grow so fast that by the time that you get done, you put all that time into it, even if it's small, and they can only wear it for a very short time. But if you make something in a toddler size, then they're going to have a chance to wear it longer. So I thought that made sense, and I made my first sweater, and I went to the shower, and of course, then there's 4 others that are saying, oh, wow. So I ended up making 5 little toddler sweaters that year, and I haven't looked back. My friend was very involved in a knitting guild, the Oakland Knitting Guild that meets in Birmingham, and I went with her to that. And she also started a little knitting group that met in her home on Sundays. And through that, I met a lot of people, including someone who on Sunday afternoon would bring her spindle. And she would be spinning like I've been spinning, and she had a spindle that looked like this. It's, you can see it when you come up. It's been carved out. It's cut out. I'm not sure of the technology of that. And so we were fascinated to see her, as it is fascinating to watch somebody do this, making this yarn. And it spun. And so one day, about 3 years ago, would be July 5th exactly, she invited a lot of us to her house to give it a try. And she had created some spindles from dowel rods, cup hooks, and CDs. So you can see how that would be the case. And she showed us how to do what I'm doing. The variation that she did, because for a beginner, it's a little, you have to practice to do what I'm doing. But for a beginner, she had us start, and we would, how yarn is made is, this is the roving, and I'll get into this in a minute more. But to make yarn, we're going to take twist and put it into these fibers. So I'm building up twist, and it will store in that yarn, and I can turn it off like a switch right here by keeping it between my fingers, and then I can pull and attenuate this yarn, and as I let it go, that twist runs up into those fibers, and it starts to stick them together. So it basically is a way of, somehow I think nanotechnology could use that as battery storage, but I don't know. Anyway, that's how she taught us, and then you do that, and you unhook it, and you wind it on, and you do it over again. So this is called the park and draft method, and it's really good for beginners. So if you take a spinning class from me, if we have a spinning class here sometime in the future, that's how we'll start out, and I'll teach you how to do this. But once you get good at it, practicing 15 minutes a day for 2 weeks is a good recommendation. Then you can let it spin and just pull it down. Then you get fancy and you can turn the corner. All right. So this is called a drop spindle. The drop spindle has been spinning technology around the world dating back to the Egyptians. Okay, so think about this. The Egyptians, sails, making all the thread that would be woven for a sail on this. How many spinners were there? Everybody was spinning. If you go to present day Peru, I took a spinning class from a woman. She was a daughter of some anthropologists who went to Peru. She was 6 years old, 5 or 6, I think. when she got there and they asked her parents about her education and what level she was at and her reading and so on, and then they said, well, and how is her spinning? And she said, they told her, well, she doesn't spin. And they all kind of went, oh, sorry, like they had stepped in something, you know. And so a bad subject. And they thought maybe she was disabled, that there was something that she could not spin. And they said, no, no, it's okay, we just don't spin in our country. And they were like, what? Because in Peru, everybody spins, and not only that, they spin all the time. And they start, when they're about 3, the little toddlers would be picking this up on the floor and playing with it and learning how to spin. So they had to have her put on a crash course, remedial course. Everybody in the village had to teach her how to spin. She was given her own spinning instructor who was 12 years old and was an expert. And she's very funny because she said now she goes back and she tells them she's written a book, and she goes all over the country teaching and at big fiber events, and she tells them, she goes back and tells them in Peru that she's a spinning instructor, and they're laughing because they think that she's joking. Because, you know, at best she was mediocre, you know, she was just in the remedial category. So, but that's what they do, and that's how a lot of technology has come out of the world of fiber because the things that have to be done in order to make it are very labor intense. Okay, so eventually we get to a spinning wheel. However, it has been measured that this technology actually can, an experienced spinner can spin more yardage per hour or whatever time on a simple spindle than can be done on a wheel. The wheel, but you would have to be, there's just reasons that we don't do that, but so there, and that's because the wheel is limited by its ratios. This is not. Okay, so the other reasons I really like the world of fiber is I'm a very hands-on person. I'm a potter. I sewed, I did this, and I like to make things. So the tactile, the color, and the community, the connections that I've made. I belong to the Black Sheep Knitting Guild, I belong to the Oakland Knitting Guild, I belong to the Michigan Hand Spinners Guild, and I belong to the Spinners Flock, which is in Chelsea, Michigan. And there was another spinning guild, but it got to be too much. So, but I knit in a couple different groups. I usually knit I have a Friday night knitting that I go to in Lake Orion at Heritage Spinning and Weaving, and I go to our little Sunday group that meets at the, where are we? First Baptist Church in Birmingham right now. Has been gracious to give us a spot. Okay, so this is fleece. Well, actually, this is more like raw fleece. I've gotten really crazy lately. I've become interested in, okay, this is what we finish up with. Where does it come from? I like to spin. I never thought I would have a fleece of, not processed fleece. I started out buying my yarn like this, or my spinning roving more in this form, or dyed and braided and prepared. And then I found out about the world of sheep. And it turns out that there are lots and lots of kinds of sheep. And it turned out that the very first fleece that I got was, this is part of it. No, this is it. This is Shetland, from the Shetland Islands. And, okay. So this is a lock off the sheep. This has actually been washed or scoured, and you can see the length of each fiber. This is probably around 6 inches, and this is a natural color. Within this fleece, there were several different colors that ranged from like a dark gray into the lighter colors. This lovely, lustrous, curly stuff this is cheesewater lamb. So what I've started doing is I keep my receipt, the card, business card where I got it, and the information, and then I washed this on June 3rd this year. And this is cheesewater lamb, and if I pull one of these out, it's more crimpy, more curly, it's a little fuzzy, and it's longer. Okay, it's similar, but for a lamb, so the adult cheesewater is probably longer. So there's different fibers. This one is Corriedale, and this is finer, it's bouncy, and here's a lock, and it's shorter. And it's not curly, the crimp is real tight, and it's a very fine micron. They measure it in microns and all that. And there's a great deal of interest because some of the sheep breeds are dying out. You know, there's fewer and fewer people that are doing them, and it turns out we don't know that much about them. And there's a woman that is going to Shetland to actually do an intense study, that because we now have all this genetic code, we can find out things about the sheep. And there has been the sheep, if you knit at all, I was going to ask, does anybody here knit, crochet? Okay. If you knit wool, you noticed, a couple years ago, the prices started going up? I mean, significantly. And that's because there's, like a lot of things in nature, there can be, you know, the potato famine, there can be the elm disease, there can be, you know, diseases that are coming into the sheep breeds. And there was something that happened in New Zealand that's affecting the wool supply. So there are people that are interested in and are looking at the genetics of sheep and all that, and also trying to learn, because this knowledge, in 2 generations, the knowledge can be gone, okay? So what happened in the United States was, with spinning, a lot of what we know about spinning was because in the 60s, the back to nature kind of movement and the hippies and wanting to have things, you know, maybe knowing more about it. There was a movement to learn more about spinning, and some of the people I know did start spinning at that time. And there was an interest in wheels, people making wheels and so forth. But it was that gap where people weren't spinning. I was telling you about the day that I learned to spin on the spindle. At about 5 minutes into it, I kind of felt like I had it, that I knew how to park and draft. And so I kept going, and in about 15 minutes, all of a sudden it felt like I was at home. This was like natural to me. And I thought, I must come from a long line of spinners. I must. I mean, well, probably we all do, but if you go back far enough. So I happened to go to a family wedding and ended up talking to one of my dad's first cousins in Kansas, and I said, yeah, this is what I'm doing, I really like it, and you know, felt like it was maybe part of, were there any, you know, spinners? And she said, well, as a matter of fact, when Bird Wilson came in 1859 to Kansas, she came with her great wheel. Now, a great wheel is a spindle-driven wheel. It was used in the 1800s through the Civil War. It's also known as a walking wheel. They usually stand about as high as a person. The wheels themselves, the circumference was quite big, and the actual wheel mechanism was made usually by the local cooper. So they were taking that technology from making the barrels to being able, and wheels, and doing that. And it's a wheel that is, Where'd my spindle go? I put it down. So we have this wheel. This is the drive wheel. Here's the relationship. And here's, this wheel makes the spindle go round and store it. Pretty much you can see the relationship. The drive wheel makes this part of the thing go around, and I would be drafting and put it in through there, which I can do later for you. So the great wheel is similar, except, oh, I didn't bring that, that it would be coming instead of, I was using this end. You can, I gotta do this. A lot of the spinning around the world is done this way. Oops, I didn't get it right. You need to have a half hitch, a double half hitch. Okay. This way, okay. Ah! My knot didn't hold. Okay, almost. So, the great wheel worked on that concept that it was, you're spinning off this end of the spindle. And it's a lot like, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but you can test this out when you go home. If you take a toilet paper roll of paper towels or something like that, and you pull it off, you know, the way it's supported this way, it's going to come off straight, right? If you turn it up this way, that roll of paper towels that roll will twist. So that's basically what we're doing. We're having that go. So I meant to bring a paper towel to show you that. That will have to be in the spinning class. Okay. So here you have these lovely locks. You've washed them because they're full of grease, the lanolin that's on the animal to keep them dry. You have to, you know, they've been running around out in the grass and the pasture, and they get a lot of dirt and mud, and so you have to remove all of that. And then you get something a little bit more like this, okay? In this case, this is clean. And now what do we do? Because it doesn't look anything like this, or this, or this. So there's different ways that fiber was prepared. There's two methods. You've probably seen something like this, carding. And in fact, in our area, there was a carding mill not far from here. There was a carding mill in Rochester. And there was one other one in the 18th century that I was looking at. And so they were all over, which meant that, you know, there were sheep here. And Oakland County, even though we have some high ground and some swamps and all those other things, but people still needed to have something to wear. And so what you do to card is you load this up. This is not the best stuff to card, and these are not, I don't have the best cards yet. Carding is new to me, so I haven't invested in that. So I'm going to card. And carding, you want to be light, and then take it off. And then we'll transfer it over to here. And then we can roll this up. This is just a quick, make a little roll. And then switch gears here a little bit. I can spin right off of there. So there's the end of it, and I just let the twist catch it, and I can just spin it. Now you'll see that it's a little bit more hairy and lumpy because this is what's called a woolen preparation. You've heard of woolen mills. And woolen was probably, it has more air, it traps more air, it's a different texture, it has more texture, it's warm. What I spin a lot is, and what I was spinning with this, is what you would call or what's known in the United States as a worsted preparation. And you've heard of worsted goods or worsted gabardine. It's a very smooth, it makes a very smooth yarn. And so what happens, these are combs. These are miniature combs. They were just easier for me I moved recently, so it was easier for me to find these and bring these than the big ones. I have a set that the tines are like this, and a lot of times they're double rows. So you load the, let's see, there's the tips. Load the fiber on here, and then comb it out. And what this does is for one thing, if there was any vegetable matter in there, it would fall out. So any straw, grass, whatever, it would fall out. And what this does is it aligns the fibers, it gets them all parallel, so that when I twist them, they make a smooth yarn. And there's lots of ways to do that. And this is a combed, when it's combed, it's called top, because this takes more raw fleece to prepare. You're going to have more waste. I don't have a lot of waste because this particular kind of fiber lends itself to being combed. But if I tried to comb this, I would have a lot of short ends and little things, and so it's the top quality, or the cream of the crop kind of thing. So I could actually spin right off. I haven't done this off as my spindle, so we'll try it. So just to sample it, I would do this. And there's a big mill still existing in Michigan. I've run into people in Virginia and all over the country who send their stuff. It's in Frankenmuth, and it's called Zeiglinger's. And they will take your fiber and they will prepare roving, or they will prepare top. Okay, so now I'm going to get this, and I don't have a lot, but okay, I need more. Excuse me. Not enough twist here. Get that connected. Okay. So you're going to be able to see, this is a much smoother, it's smoother, I'm sorry. It's a smooth yarn that I'm getting. I don't generally spin off my combs for spindles. So I would usually sit at the wheel and do that. But it's a very smooth yarn. This has so much bounce in it, it's going to be beautiful. Okay. The other thing that you would do before you actually would card or comb, it's something I thought was interesting. You actually sort, this is called a staple. You sort the staples by the length and by what part of the fleece they come from. And it was actually a guild of staplers guild, and it actually, after it became like anything else, their job was becoming obsolete because there were carding mills and other places, mechanization to do it. The Staplers Guild took over providing what we call staples in in our groceries or in our pantries. So they took over being wholesalers of flour and that kind of thing. So it's like, oh, I always wonder where words come from. So they were actually people who that sorted the staples of the sheep, and then somehow, I'm not sure, I'd have to look that all up to find out, but interesting how things change, you know. We don't do LPs anymore, we have CDs, we have downloads and all of that. And they had to change, their cheese moved too, you know, couldn't be staplers anymore, so they found another thing to do. All right, spinning and the fiber produced. All right, now once we spin, so this is the roving that would be carded. Then I make, where's my thing? A single. Okay, so I have another one of my spindles, and this is my single. This is the yarn that I made by plying two singles together. So I'm not going to ply, I usually ply on my wheel, but I'll show you what I mean by plying. Plying is, I can take this yarn and double it back on itself, and you know, it's not fresh. Okay, and then I add twist in the opposite direction. If you add it in the same direction, you get a really big mess. And then, well, it's not going to stay. What happens is when the spindles are, this is single has been on here for a long time. It doesn't want, I would have to add more twist than I'm getting there. So let me see, what have I got that's fresh? Where'd my other spindle go? I've lost it. No, that's all right. So anyway, there are so this has got mohair and some local, this I got from a local producer. And this is two singles that are plied together. And when you're done, there's all kinds of equipment. I have a skein winder, I have an antique skein winder that I found. And you wind it on there. Then you need to wash it again. And it sets the twist. And then it's made up into a skein. All right. So then I wanted to talk about, do you want to take a little break and have something to drink or move around at all? Do you feel like you want to, okay. Just thought I'd give you a chance. It's hard to sit for a while if you want to stand up and stretch. Okay, so I told you that I like to dabble. I like to sample. I've been able to, been very fortunate to be able to go to a number of different workshops, as well as, you know, being connected to this knitting community. And talk about the one I went to most recently. This spring, there's a spinning, she's kind of the spinning guru. Judith McKenzie and Kate Larson in Indiana did a workshop on bohus knitting. And bohus knitting was, in fact, some of you might have a sweater that was, there was a cottage industry in Sweden, and it was active from in between the first two world wars through the Depression and into the mid-60s. And what they were doing was they were designing very high-end fashion kind of sweaters that were carried in department stores. The designs were specified, and they hired young women to do the knitting, and the colors that were used were very close in value and then would have some different pops of color. So this is something that I got to try some of the patterns. And also Judith McKenzie came in and we had a morning session where we dyed. Now this was just undyed yarn, and there were 3 pots of color. There was a blue, there was a yellow, and there was red. And in those, by dipping these in various times and amounts, and I got these different colors. And I tried to make them so that they could be knit together in that style of knitting and still work. And there's a new book out called Poems of Color that goes into the whole history of bohus knitting. And this woman that did it, she put this company together, and she did it because she saw a need that it was an area that was economically depressed, and they really needed some kind of income to come in, and that was her idea. And she paid people very well, and they were very loyal to her. So that's an older tradition. Now, this is an example of color work that would be from Estonia. There are several scholars that are working on trying to preserve the patterns and the styles and the traditions of this type of color work knitting that's in the Baltic area. And so I was able to take a workshop on that. I planned this as I went. We learned each different section, so it's a Christmas stocking. And it was also interesting to me to find out that many of the things that we have in knitting that we consider knitting traditions, like color work or lace, actually originated as cottage industries. That's how they came into to being popularized. Knitting is the new kid on the block in terms of fiber. There was weaving way before. The first sweaters I think were something more like in 250 years ago was when sweaters, and really sweaters were more popularized in the 20th century than they ever were before. There was more shawls, wraps, and outerwear types of things. So even like the ski sweaters and that kind of things, those were cottage industry. So after I took this class, I think I made Brian a hat, and then I do some charity knitting. In fact, I don't have a lot here of things that I've actually knit, because about 2/3 of my stuff goes elsewhere. About 1/3 goes to charity things. There's a big event every year called Knit Michigan. And if you haven't heard about it, Knit Michigan was started by a small group of knitters in our area. It provides direct assistance through 5 area hospitals to cancer patients and their families for, if they need help with their rent or, different things that they need. There's a fund that they provide to these hospitals. There's chemo caps and other types of comfort items that go all over the state. And once a year, the knitters gather, there's vendors, and classes. And the first year that they had it, they thought, well, we'll see what happens, and they raised like $30,000. And so they were just astonished by the success of that. And so they, in the 4 or 5 years that it's been going, they've raised well over $100,000 for cancer patients. And so the knitting community is very generous. And there's been thousands of chemo caps going out. And it's a nice thing to be a part of. So that's color work examples. The other thing is, this is an example of lace knitting. There's two things. There's something called lace knitting, and then there's called knitted lace. Lace knitting means that you do all your pattern on one row, and on the way back you get to do just a purl stitch, which gives me a rest. So this, I knitted this for a wedding that I was going to. And I put a little fancy sparkly yarn on the end. This is from a workshop that I went to. We had the Black Sheep Guild had a major designer come in and do a workshop for a couple days last spring. Her name was Ann Hansen, and this is knitted lace. Knitted lace is different in that you're working your lace pattern on both sides of the fabric as you go. And if you're used to doing it only on one side and then you have to do it on both sides, well, I had to do a lot of ripping out because I'd forget. So, but I eventually got it down. But what it allows you to do, this is a fancier pattern anyway, but you can do a lot of shaping a lot more quickly. This was an item that was gifted to me. This was the first sweater that I knitted in a long time. When I was in my 20s, I wanted one of those Irish, sweaters with all the cables and all the white on white and that. And that's when I knit 2 or 3 sweaters in that era, including that Irish sweater. But this one I had never knitted any lace, so it has a lace panel on each side, and then it's knitted, all the rest of it's in a plain stitch. So that was and you'll see a lot of people now, these are very, this is a cowl. I'll put it on and double it up, or you can wear it long. And they're usually two-sided. They're really fun projects. A lot of knitters like to do them because you have pretty fast results and they make great gifts. This one has a combination of garter stitch and then this in the middle that looks like weaving. It's not weaving, it's called linen stitch, and it's in a different color of yarn, the same type of yarn but in a different colorway. And I saw this, I went to a convention in Chicago called Stitches, and I saw that, and it was, I usually hem and haw and have to think a lot before I choose something, and I saw that and I went, okay, where is this? Where's the yarn? So, and I grabbed it right away and I had it done in about a couple weeks' time. This summer I was really happy to be able to go to Meg Swanson's knitting camp. Her mother was Elizabeth Zimmerman, and Elizabeth Zimmerman revolutionized knitting in the United States. She did videos for PBS. She did these videos of knitting and techniques, and she did them at home with her daughter and her son, and or her 2 daughters, and sent them to PBS stations around the country and asked them to air them, and they did. And so she has a whole, there's been 41 years of knitting camp. This is done, if I had known what the original instruction, I would have not had any seams at all. I think I grafted this. There's no seams. And all of the shaping, all of the curves of this are done by techniques called short rows and shaping. So if you want to look at that, knitters would know. And I want to make bigger ones. This was called a rib warmer, and it's one of her famous patterns. This is a little summer top I made that was out of hemp, a hemp cotton blend. Take a look at that. And I recently, the other thing that's going on a lot, and particularly in church congregations, is prayer shawls or shawls for comfort. And a friend of mine has a serious disease, and I decided to make her one. A lot of the prayer shawls are knit 3, purl 3, and so on. And I did it on the diagonal by shifting it over each time. It wasn't my idea. I found that on Ravelry, and Ravelry is a huge knitting community that's online. I know what I was going to show you. So there's a huge tradition starting from the Shetland Islands of triangular shawls. I'm not sure if that's where it actually started or not, but this is a modern version. This is a pattern by Jared Flood. This was made a man that did this pattern. There's several male designers that are very active right now. And I didn't knit this. I was the happy recipient. A friend of mine came out and said, "Oh, look what I did." And I went, "Oh, I want to make that." And she said, "It's for you." And she just gave it to me. She hadn't planned on giving it to me, but when she knew I was in love with it, so I hold it dear. So the last thing I thought I'd do, we're winding down, is I'd show you what's on my needles right now. And when I was at knitting camp, let me see, I'm going to do this. This is like a poncho, except it's not, I'm going to make sure I don't mess up. It's still in the needles. It's like a poncho, but it's not closed in the front, so I can use it as over my shoulders. And it's made out of Icelandic wool, so it will. And I have this much left, so it will be, it's getting bigger and bigger as it goes because it's simple. It increases at 3 different places, so it increases at each shoulder and it increases at the back. And this is unspun Icelandic wool, so it's much like this, except very, very thin. And it's very, if you pick it up, you'll find it's very light and airy, and it's going to be extremely warm. And the last thing that I have is, this is a little lace shawl that I'm doing. And the construction is interesting in that it's knitted in a long U shape and back and forth. And that's so that you can, instead of having to do this, where I have to tie it, it has a built-in hole, so I can put this end down in it. So, and it will be beaded. And I think, I haven't talked too much about the wheel. Wheels are now portable. This folds up very easily. I unhook one of the footmen. I have a little slide here. I push this down. Okay, push these up. And there you go. This, and then I remove the flyer, and it comes in. I have a bag for it. I could easily take it on an airplane or put it in a suitcase and take it on an airplane. It's been in several states, so so I think that I'm kind of running out of time, and I wanted to leave a little time for questions. I know I've covered a lot of ground. I've done a little survey of my history of the craft as I've come to know it in the various stages of how things are done. So, yes? What type of dye? This was a synthetic dye, a Prochem super milled dye, and it is it's commercially available, and it is not one of the toxic type. Yeah, some of the dyes, like this is a weak acid dye. You have to use acid dyes for protein, and then if you use protein, silk is also one of the proteins, but for your bast fibers that are your flax and your cotton and those things, you have to have a different type of dye. And there are people who are doing a lot with learning again about the natural dyes and how those are used and how you get the bright colors, because people did get bright colors back in the day. Yeah.
In 1880, they were doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Where did those women get their colors?
Get their colors.
They had to go to a general store. Was the system
I believe that a lot of that would have been grown. Some of the sheep were, colored, so you'd have gray and black and brown sheep. So, and then also indigo would be imported from North Carolina. There were big indigo plantations, And indigo, I haven't done the indigo, but that's quite a process all on its own. The dyeing can be messy. You know, I haven't gotten into that too much. I'm interested in it because I like color. So, and I enjoyed what I did with that, but you know, it's a big world of knowledge. So, I mean, you can get a master's in knitting, and through Olds College, you can get a master's in spinning. So, or become a master spinner, which is probably different than a master's in. So much like a, oh, anything else? Yes?
When you were talking about ply,
Yes.
so what you did was 2-ply. Right?
2-ply.
So when it says 4-ply, that's 4.
There's 4 strands, right. Right. So the more, what happens is when it's 2-ply, the 2 strands are like this and then they're twisting, you know. So it tends to be flat, a little bit flat because of that. And it's really good for open work because, well, I don't know the technical reason, but I know it's good for open work. It's also very durable. And then when you add the 3rd ply in, it becomes more round. I have to have some visuals, but anyway, it becomes more circular. So the more plies that you put in, the yarn becomes more and more rounded. So if you have 10 plies, you're going to have a very smooth yarn. And I also had a chance to learn about silk, but I didn't bring any. There's some silk in some of these things, but I didn't bring any of that. There's someone who was told, no, you can't spin, you can't, silk is called reeling silk. You can't reel silk. Like, well, you know, that was all it took. So he's been reeling silk and teaching silk reeling workshops, and there was silk in this area. So, but that's a whole nother topic. Anything else? I invite you to come up and look and ask questions. And okay, all right. Thank you. Thanks very much.